The question was, is there any info on how hitboxes will work? Can a larger model potentially be clipped by an arrow when a smaller one wouldn't? This is a very important question because it is the core of good action combat. And one of the things people have to realize is there is going to be some normalization of hitboxes, because if you don't do normalization of hitboxes, then everybody makes the smallest, tiniest character they can to avoid all action combat. Now, number one, a lot of the action combat is going to be on the crosshair. So you're not going to be avoiding a lot of it. Where a big part of that comes in is ranged combat, specifically with arrows. And it will determine on whether or not they do hit scan or they do projectile. If they do hit scan, there is still some advantage to having a small character. If they do projectile, it becomes even worse. So there will be a center core cylinder for the hitbox. Now, is it possible that if you make your character too short, is it possible that because there's a standard cylinder size, right? Even though I've made my character, right? I've made my character this short, and I did that on purpose to bring my hitbox. The standard character model is basically going to be like this. So my standard character model, even though my head's here, the standard character model says that I have another head on top of my head. I have an extra eighth of my body height, because they say, well, you can go that small, but for people to hit you fairly, they're going to be able to hit you fairly on the imaginary mesh of your hitbox. Isn't that really awkward, though? It is. It does become really awkward. And what you normally don't have is the ability to scale your character down. And a game I can tell you that did this very, very poorly was Revelation Online. Everybody made their character in Revelation Online as small as they could, because there were a couple of classes that used action combat, and it did give you a tactical advantage. Since there's no headshots, I mean, you can hit the person in the head, but it doesn't have a mechanic attached to it. That changes it. And they went with that way because it gets a little bit more awkward. Now, can you make Slenderman? Can you make Slenderman in the hopes that you have an advantage? Well, if this is you, right? If this is you, we can't. We actually have to try here. So, and obviously my art is deplorable. All right. So, this is you. And this is somebody who's trying to get an advantage, right? So they make themselves roughly these dimensions. And obviously you can see, yeah, straight out of Unreal Engine. Fucking, I am the greatest artist that they've ever had. So, obviously this would be a huge advantage. So the solution to that is, well, first of all, we need to move this guy down. We need to move this guy down to foot level, right? So that's roughly foot level. We'll fill this back in. So the way this happens is, and this gets really, really awkward, is this guy and this guy. Oh, hold on, because that's So you see this box and this box are roughly mostly the same. Your hitbox, yeah, Odd Job and GoldenEye is a great example of that. I have fun at work. So your setup is going to be you're this little tiny guy, right? But there's an arrow that goes up above your head, hits you, and an arrow that goes over there hits you, and an arrow that goes over there hits you, and an arrow that goes over there hits you. Now, that's not fair, but it's also not fair that you're trying to cheese the system by making a tiny ass character. Do hitboxes matter in tab target games? No. Do hitboxes matter in action combat games? Yes. Would Intrepid? No, hitboxes do not matter in the slightest in tab target games. The hitbox doesn't matter because you're not manually aiming. Not in terms of combat. Right now, we're only talking about combat. The other things you're going to talk about are design decisions. Yeah. If they can crawl through different areas, that doesn't have anything to do with the hitbox. That has to do with the rest of the game design. And that's how you solve that problem. But in terms of combat, are there going to be people who cheese it, who take a character that's really, really small in the hopes of avoiding some of the action combat? Sure. You mean you find a small character, make a small character and find a big shield. Make a small character and have basically have Gandalf and the Hobbits. Make your tank the size of Gandalf or Boromir, and then have all of your mages and clerics and bards be the size of the Hobbits, so that like your tank puts his shield wall up and everybody's behind him and can't be seen. Do I think that Intrepid should have abandoned action combat a long time ago? Because I think Intrepid Studios can solve this problem? No, I don't. And I'm not trying to be condescending to Intrepid Studios. I don't think Intrepid Studios can solve the hitbox action combat scenario, because AAA studios with $500 million budgets can't get action combat to feel right. And that's why games are usually either action combat or they're tab combat. I think Intrepid took too big of a bite. And I hate to say my empirical evidence is the fact that you're 14 months late, but my empirical evidence is that you're 14 months late. You couldn't bring the game to market on your original timeline. You're barely getting into Alpha 1 now, and you're trying to accomplish something that big studios walk away from. Now, I'm not saying not to try it just because big studios walk away from it, but I'm saying you're not at the point where you're ready to relaunch now, and now you're playing around with this other version of combat. You're not 672 miles off the Japanese coast. You haven't even left California yet. You're not ready to launch. I don't think Intrepid has the moxie or the depth of bench to make the hybrid combat work in a way that addresses the hitbox problem. I think the only way they're going to be able to solve it is by having a very, very narrow range of height and width, so that they don't have to try to play with the meshes. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a lot of shenanigans. And I'm going to tell you, my playing a Vec has nothing to do with their size. When I made the decision to be a Vec, I thought they were the size of the Renkai. I didn't know that they were the smallest race. But if you think for 1 second that if I'm going to be a Vec anyway, and if you think I can, if I can shrink my character model down to be harder to hit by rogues and fighters, you bet your sweet ass I'm going to be the smallest possible Vec model. Now, to talk about the thing about not in terms of combat. Yes, the Vec are the smallest race. They are smaller than the dwarves. Jeff said this on the live stream. Now, are there ways, right, are there ways to stop people from being silly with their characters? Sure, absolutely. One of the ways, and I told you guys I was DMing for or GMing for Rifts, and the character had such a horrible strength roll that they had to actually go back into character creation, because I don't allow stat rerolls. I allow you to you get when I DM, you roll your stats, and then I do allow you to potentially change your occupational class in Rifts, but I don't allow you to just re-roll stats. You figure it out. The person rolled a 3 strength. They literally 3d6 and they threw a 3. They didn't even have the physical strength to wear the armor that came with the class. And so they had to go back into character creation and take physical training abilities that allowed them to get extra strength rolls just to carry their gear. Well, that's one way of one way of doing MMORPG balance. However, that decision, penalties and bonuses to physical size based on how you mesh your character, it can be done. But then every other system must contribute to the party line. So, for example, let me bring back up our identical class. And this is identical class, identical race, identical everything. Okay? And what we're going to say is, let me do one more Slenderman here, and I'm going to do middle of the road. And guys, I suck at art, so I do apologize. And since I drew this a little while ago, my brain doesn't remember. Yeah, it's not gonna. One second, and we'll try to make the head about the same. At least so that we're dealing with the same. Yeah, that's not too horrible. He's kind of jazzing. He's kind of jazzing. He's like getting ready to do the Saturday Night Fever. He's got that one leg kind of bow-legged. The ladies love him. But that's neither here nor there. Let's throw a box around him. So we're gonna do our T-box now real quick. So here's our T-box for what is considered normal and acceptable, and I think I eyeballed that pretty damn good. Yeah. So we got our T-box pretty well good. So now here's where the problem with this balancing comes in, right? I can say, no, change that back. There we go. I can say that because this guy is normal, then he is plus minus nothing, right? This guy is well below the 50% threshold. So this guy gets a negative to things like strength and vitality. Okay? But now, hold up. Slow down, Tobosh, Tobnosh. Slow down. Slow down. Slow down. I got to give him a penalty first. I'm going to give this guy a negative to strength and a negative to vitality because he decided to go well below the 50% range of the character. But now, because I gave a penalty, do I necessarily have to give a bonus? Do I got to give a bonus to this guy because he decided to go above? Do I want to have a positive and negative reinforcement system, or do I just want to have a punishment system? Well, if I do this, how much do I reduce the strength and vitality? What becomes a meaningful number? Hold up. You're giving, stop it. Stop. You said plus something. We're not there yet. We can't give them, we can't give them an advantage yet. We're punishing them for going below the 50% part. We got to do the punishment first. You're trying to give, you're already trying to give bonuses to them. Then you haven't even done the first step of balance. If we don't want them to make these little Lilliputians, we have to penalize them first. And since we penalize them with a negative strength and a negative vitality, now we move over to the big. They're not bonuses, they're incentives. Stop it. Now we go over to the big guy and we're stuck with a balancing question. Do we give the big guy a bonus because he went bigger than the 50%? That's our first question. And now if we give him a bonus, have we double penalized the little people? How much do we not want there to be little people? And now we have to start going into the, well, logic dictates that the larger races will automatically have more of strength and more of vitality, and the smaller races should have less of strength and less of vitality. But now every decision, you see, we made one decision. Now every decision is going to touch. Now we have to ask the question, what is the meaningfulness? No, we're not at stamina yet. Stop it. You haven't even made the negative strength meaningful. So I take 6 strength off of you because you're the little person. Is 6 strength meaningful enough to be a penalty? Well, this then becomes, I have to have this touch the inventory system. Now we say our inventory system has to be related to strength. Now we get a big stop. We get to stop it because Steven has said there will be no crossover between the adventuring classes and the gathering classes, the artisan classes. So we can't make this adjustment, because if strength determines inventory and inventory determines gathering efficiency, and gathering efficiency in strength only comes from your adventuring class, now you have your rules are in violation of your design pillars. This is why when you guys were all ready to run out right out the fucking gate, and you're like, the bell sounded, the gates dropped, all the horses were ready to run out. You just said, this is so exhausting, not worth the bonus punishment. Okay. But this is the fundamental, this is the 6 months of you don't even touch a computer. You spend time in a conference room, eating pizza, eating sandwiches, sitting around a table, bullshitting, trying to figure out. This is when you have the room that has nothing but dry erase boards and nothing but Post-it notes, and everybody on the team has a different color Post-it notes and a Sharpie marker, and you're constantly swatting down the good idea fairy, because if you don't take into account the inventory system when strength, then giving person a 6 strength penalty because they went too small on the mesh box is an absolutely meaningless punishment. Now you get into the next part where you guys are trying to say, all right, little guy, big guy, little guys, people below the 50% mark take a hit in strength and vitality, but they get a boost in movement speed. Normal people have a normal movement speed. People above the 50% size, they take a penalty to movement speed. Okay, that sounds great. First thing that popped into my head. If bows are based on dex, not strength or vitality, and movement speed is based on my size, I'm going to make a Vec Ranger small as shit, and I'm going to run around people. I refuse to believe someone half my size can run faster than me. You, Six, have you ever watched military PT tests? I ran pretty fast, and I got fucking I got fucking owned by a 5'1" girl, a little redhead girl, 5'1". I'm 6 foot, she's 5'1". She crushed my runtime. She crushed my runtime by over a minute. Character size, height matters in this game? No, Sky. We were talking about we go down rabbit holes on this show because it's good for people to talk. Somebody asked the question of hitboxes because there is action combat. Your character does have a your character does have a mesh. How are they going to normalize that? How are they going to stop people from making little tiny shitheads that you can barely see and you can't hit with a sword? And are you at a disadvantage if you're an action combat camera, because now you have to be looking down. So there's lots of bits and pieces to it. It's why I've said, and I know you guys get upset when I say this, but I have always and constantly maintained the fact that Intrepid Studios should have abandoned hybrid combat years ago, because there's too many other things they need to get right. And I'll say what I always say. If you have a game like Ashes of Creation with diverse races and classes and a rich lore and an engaging dungeon system and a fun crafting system, and you have meaningful PvP systems and wars and sieges and guilds and good naval content, and you have all of these things going for the game, and you end up using tab combat, people will forgive the fact that it's a tab combat game because you've got these 8, 9, 10, 12 great exquisite systems. But if you have the same 8, 9, 10, 12 exquisite game systems, and you're using hybrid combat or action combat, and the action combat isn't amazing, then all you have at the end of the day is a shitty action combat game. I think Intrepid made the right decision by coming out in 2019 when Steven and I talked during my interview with him, and he kind of defined out what he calls action combat. Number one, they needed to do that because Intrepid likes to run around and not set the record straight, not always deliberately, not always maliciously, not always with a ulterior motive, but sometimes they know that there's confusion and they don't willingly and energetically go out there and clean up the confusion. So I think there's a problem there. But I asked Steven directly, hey man, what's action combat? And he explained it. I said, what's tab combat? And he explained it. I think those things are important. Action combat to tab combat to Steven is any ability that must have a locked target. So I tab over to you, I have you locked, I hit a button, I throw an ability at you. Action combat is anything that I don't have to have you locked, so it can be my weapon attack, it can be my cross reticles, it can be my frontal cones, it could be my ground AoEs, it can be my off-center AoEs. So what we have here is an end screen. I'd like to say a big thank you to all those names scrolling up the right-hand side of the screen. Those are my sponsors over at Patreon. Wouldn't be able to pay the bills without them. For the rest of you, there's videos. Follow the channel, like, subscribe, do all those social media things.